Well, maybe we could just walk around and look at some of the trees in the garden. And I think I can explain maybe the layout of the garden as well here, because it's quite interesting. It's not my concept necessarily, it's our garden builder's concept, but it's so cool. I'd like to show you some of those things around the garden.
Yeah, because how did you get to the garden design and actually the house design? You have your own aesthetic view on how a garden should be. This is very much a Japanese laid out garden. You brought in expertise locally, I suppose.
Yeah, I initially, once we bought this property here and we had kind of designed the house and I knew the layout of the house, I designed the garden myself around that. I knew the elements that I wanted in here, but I didn't know necessarily how all the details would kind of fall into place. So we ended up hiring En, which is a very famous garden building company here in Kyoto. Sone-san, who is the CEO and president of the company right now, she's third generation owner of the company, and she did an amazing job taking my basic design and adding all of these incredible details throughout, very thoughtful things throughout the garden.
It looks very impressive, especially knowing that this garden finished yesterday.
Literally yesterday.
It looks like it could have been here for a decade.
Yeah. It's unbelievable, the elements that they put in here and the way it's all blended together. Yeah, it looks, like you said, like it's been here for a long time.
Yeah.
We'll go to the front part of the garden then, and I'll just
explain the garden.
And then explain the full concept, the shin-gyo-so thing, and then we can talk about a couple of trees. Okay, excellent.
Now, your garden, it's been laid out, you say, specifically according to your thoughts. Mm-hmm. What is so unique about the garden, except for, of course, these marvelous bonsai here?
Sure, yeah. I laid out the pathway and the monkey poles and the sort of the main trees within the garden, the landscaping trees myself, but the details of the garden, like I said, were kind of decided by Sone-san or kind of incorporated by Sone-san. The most important of which I think, or the biggest concept of which, is the idea of shin-gyo-so, which is the Japanese design concept of formal, semi-formal, and informal. You see this applied to tokonomas, for example, bonsai display, all sorts of different things. I think even in ikebana, they use this concept. But the way it works here in the garden is that the first section of the garden here, we're kind of in the entrance garden, this is the formal area of the garden. And it's indicated not by the trees that are up here, but by the pathway that's actually laid out here. So the pathway here is all harsh rectangular shapes, indicating that sort of more formal appearance. All right, as you move further back into the garden, the next section is actually the semi-formal section, and it's also indicated by a shift in the pathway. It's a mix of these harsh stones with natural stones, right? So you get kind of that semi-formal vibe, if you will. And then the back section of the garden is the informal area, and the pathway shifts again to a very meandering, kind of smooth concrete path.
So you say it's not reflected in the trees, but we do have that styling in the trees as well, right? Is that exactly the same concept where you have the formal trees and more informal style trees?
You could certainly say that, but you don't normally hear those terms applied specifically to a tree, aside from like really specific styles like formal upright, like the chokan style. Yeah. Exactly. Like, that would be a formal bonsai, and the bunjin style would be an informal style. Everything else kind of falls in the middle between. Of that. Yeah, so you don't normally hear it applied to the tree specifically. It's more of the tree in a display setting, for example, like a tokonoma design. If it's a formal design, it's going to have dark lacquer, really harsh lines. An informal design is going to have a much softer coloration, maybe a natural, what's called a tokobashira, which is kind of the post that sits next to the tokonoma. And then the bonsai displayed in there will kind of be a reflection of that style.
Do you have a tokonoma set up?
I do have a tokonoma set up.
Then I'm going to bring the camera in a second.
All right, we're going to check it out. Yeah.
How many trees have you been wiring out over the last, say, 2 months for opening up?
Yeah, we've gone through quite a bit of work here at the garden. I had a couple of students, like I said, come through and help me out with a few things. So this tree here is actually one that I've recently styled for a Bonsai U episode. It hasn't been released on the platform quite yet, but this is one that was essentially a raw piece of yamadori, and I took a big jack and a big piece of rebar and cranked the apex down a couple of weeks ago in preparation for our open event this week.
Yeah, it's got quite a few tension wires in there. So what do we have here? This is a very nice big old Chinese juniper. It looks a little bit dull, but that's because of the frost you've been having.
Right.
What's the story behind this tree?
So this is a tree that I actually originally styled during my apprenticeship at Fujikawa-san's garden. I guess it probably would have been 2013, 2014 when I styled this tree. This is an Itoigawa Shinpaku juniper, and it's not a grafted tree. It's a naturally occurring Itoigawa, which is very rare and hard to find.
One of the famed Yamadori
Exactly. Yeah, this would have been collected in the Niigata prefecture, likely from a mountain called Kurohime, which translates to the Black Princess Mountain, which is a very ominous name. But most of the best Itoigawas were collected from that mountain. All of these trees, I guess from the mid 1980s onward, it's been illegal to collect them. So this was collected probably just after World War II, because the first time it was put in an exhibition, it was the Kokufu. I believe it was 1974, 1975, and it's been in the Kokufu a couple times since then. So a very famous old tree, very elegant plant as well. I know a lot of people like big, powerful junipers. I prefer much more elegant trees in general. So this is one that I've always been a huge fan of, and it just happened to come up for sale at Fujikawa-san's garden. So I purchased it to have it here.
You didn't get a call from him, I'm going to sell your tree. Are you interested?
No. I actually, he had moved it in his garden. He's got a sales area and a customer area. And it had moved one day from the customer area to the sales area. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I asked him about it. He said, the original customer decided to sell it. So I jumped on it.
Nice. So how does that work with bonsai coming for sale? Do nurseries actually keep track of people that are looking for specific trees? Can you put in requests?
Yeah, each nursery here in Japan kind of has its set customer base. Yeah. There are people who move from nursery to nursery, but in general, you build a relationship with a specific nursery as a customer, and that nursery then kind of understands your tastes and your buying habits, and they will source trees maybe at auctions or from other customers that they think might be to your taste, and then provides a portfolio of those plants to you each time that you come.
Now there is this story that you can go to a nursery and no matter how much money you have, you will not be able to buy a tree unless the owner allows you to buy that specific tree. Is there a ring of truth to it, that they first need to know you as a customer before you are allowed to buy better trees?
There's certainly that aspect of it. I would say, I've even had that experience myself relatively recently, going around and buying trees from various professionals. They all know who I am, but they don't know exactly how serious I am about buying certain plants. So I won't name any names, but I went to a relatively famous nursery recently and inquired about a couple of trees. And I knew there were trees that were for sale because they're in a specific area of the garden, but the response was, oh, that's a customer's tree, which is a very diplomatic way of saying, I don't think you are really serious, or maybe you probably can't afford this tree, so I'm not even going to venture down that path with you, which is fine. But that's kind of the normal thing here is Japan is very indirect when it comes to language. So rather than saying, no, I'm not going to sell it to you, they'll say something like, oh, it's a customer's tree, right? So it's an easy way around it.
Interesting. Because those are the nice little stories that you hear.
Yeah.
But only when you live here, you actually experience what it really is like.
Exactly, yeah.
Is there any other trees that you say, well, let's have a look at that?
Sure, there's a couple in the back. We'll go take a look at them.
Japanese white pine, Pinus parviflora, I would say. This is also a nice old tree. It's not grafted, is it?
No, this is a collected Yamadori on its own root system, triple trunk tree. This tree I have been a massive fan of since I was, probably 20 years old or so. I'll be 40 this year. So for the last 20 years, I've been a fan of this tree. About a year ago, we were taking our Kokufu tour around Japan, and we happened to go to Eisei En nursery up in Nagoya. It's one of the oldest nurseries in the country. And this tree was on kind of one of the back benches at the garden in a really teeny tiny pot. It was a little bit on the weak side. So I asked the owner of the nursery if it was available for sale, and he said his customer had just brought it in recently. So he would call the customer and see if it was available, and it turned out that it was. So I ended up purchasing it from them. But this tree is actually what's called a Kicho bonsai, which is a registered important bonsai masterpiece.
Yeah, I actually noticed the little steel label on there.
Exactly, the little tag here. So Kicho actually translates to precious if you translate it directly. But what this means is that it's a registered tree with the Japanese Bonsai Association. So every year in March, trees that are potential plants for the registry will get taken up to Tokyo, put before the committee there, and then they select out the best ones to be registered. So it's not that this tree, for example, can't leave Japan. A lot of Kicho Bonsai get shipped overseas. It's just mainly to register the best quality trees in Japan. And this one might not seem like, one of those trees that maybe is deserving of that, but it's an elegant, rare, multi-trunk, not separate seedlings that have grown together, but growing from one base, which is quite rare. And the elegant nature of this tree is just something that speaks to me personally.
Very nice. It's sort of trees you don't often see on my side of the world.
Yeah.
It's in Europe, it's hard to get this older materials. Somehow bonsai started in Europe, of course, only 80, 90 years ago, really. And only the last 30 or 40 years, people have been growing bonsai, so getting material that is really old and developed is quite rare.
Right.
It's, I think it's an impressive tree. And
the cool thing about this is kind of a collaborative design. So last fall, Rafa Torres, my buddy from Spain, and Milan Karpasek from Czech, they were hanging out here. So I styled the main apex here, Rafa styled the little baby trunk, and then Milan did the back trunk. So it's
can we still see that somewhere in the styling, or?
I don't know. So I taught, Rafa's been my long-term student, so he wires very similarly to me, and Milan does as well. So I think it would be hard to determine exactly who did what if I didn't say anything. So.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the transitions of the wire, and I see that the transitions in the V's, wherever you go from a thicker to a thinner wire, you do it in exactly the same way that I do, so I'm quite happy.
Excellent.
I learned well. Thank you, Werner.
Werner's a good teacher, yeah.
Great. Now you're making life difficult here.
Oh, can you get in?
Yep, I can.
Excellent, all right.
Chinese junipers. Is also Itoigawa?
This is also Itoigawa, yeah. And this is not a grafted tree. This is another one that I believe is on its own, natural roots.
So also Yamadori.
Yep, old Yamadori. So
50s.
This tree was actually originally designed by a fellow named Fukudate-san. So he is a former apprentice of Kunio Kobayashi at Shin-gyo-so. A really, really nice guy. He purchased this tree when it was pretty much like a semi-raw piece of material and did all of the work that you see on it here. I can't claim any of this work other than a little bit of cleanup. But he had it for sale at the Kokufu last year, and I had actually seen this tree presented in the Sakufuten prior to that. And this tree is actually in the 50th anniversary Sakufuten book. Right, so he had it at his sales booth. I inquired about it and ended up purchasing it. And what's interesting about this, not only the look of the tree and the uniqueness as a Bunjin style tree, but the pot that this tree is in is actually a custom-made pot for this tree. Maybe it looks a little bit strange right now. It's a brand new pot. This is made by a friend of mine in the United States, Nao Tokutake.
Okay.
So he's American-born Japanese, makes incredible pots, and he and I are doing a special exhibition here in the garden during the Taikon 10 later this year. Some of my trees in his pots with paintings that are going to specifically be made for each of these trees hanging on the walls around the garden by an artist from Spain who happens to be Rafa Torres' tattoo artist. His name is Neil Marquez. He's a fantastic painter. So we're going to have a really cool kind of international collaborative exhibition here at the garden.
It's going to be an interesting opening then.
Definitely, yeah.
What I find very unique here is this piece of deadwood on the side that really seems to contrast with the living side here. Really, I love that wood.
It's interesting, yeah. When I initially saw this tree at the Kokufu last year, I took some photos of it and sent it to Fujikawa-san, my teacher, as I like to get his opinion about things. And he said, "Is that gin on the side? Is that attached? Meaning was it glued on? Because sometimes that happens here. Yeah, but if you look very, very closely, it's actually not. From the back side, it's a little hard to tell." Right, but actually, if you get close in here,
you see the.
It's not glued at all. So this is a natural piece of deadwood on the side of the tree, which makes it even more interesting and unique.
Now we've been looking at a lot of coniferous trees. I quickly popped a mention of the Prunus muma. Do you have tridents? Tridents are somehow one of my favorite species.
Sure, one of my favorite trees in the garden is a trident. So let's go take a look at that in the back.
Yeah, this is how we like them. This trident maple, and you said that defoliating at the right time is critical for getting good ramification. How much time do you spend defoliating a tree like this?
So this tree, if I were to do it in one setting, it wouldn't really take that long. I would say maybe an hour, hour and a half, something like that to defoliate it. But again, this is after many, many years of practicing and doing it, over and over and over again.
And do you then manually clip every leaf off, or are you a little bit more
aggressive? Yeah. And so each tree is going to be slightly different. You could have 10 tridents, and they all need to be treated slightly differently. This tree, we do a combination of hand plucking and scissor pruning. So if the shoots are too strong to pluck by hand, we'll use scissors to cut them back a little bit. But most of the foliage can be ripped off, and the buds don't come off with the foliage. It's just the petiole that rips off. As long as the buds remain on there, it's fine. So we do this every May. And this is a tree that I actually worked on during my apprenticeship as well. I love the tree back when I was younger. and it happened to come up for sale at Fujikawa-san's garden a couple years ago. So it's also planted in a now tokotake pot.
Yep.
It's a fantastic pot. This pot looks like it's 50, 60 years old. He made it last fall, sent it to me in early November, and we slip potted it in here in late November last year.
So is he the sort of person who puts these pots in a dishwasher for the glaze to wear down?
I have no idea how he makes
That's
this.
the recommendation I got from a potter. That if you have a very high glossy pot, you put it in a dishwasher without the glass protection, and you just rinse it 20 cycles, and it deteriorates as quickly as it would in 10 years in the garden.
I don't think he does that.
Not this size, right?
Maybe not with this size. He has some sort of a special technique, I guess.
Yeah.
So he's an engineer by trade, so he's got all sorts of ideas about how to do things differently.
Knows material.
He does, yeah. So it's the craftsmanship of the pot is incredible. It matches the tree perfectly. So this is a really cool collaboration that we did here.
Now, is this 2 trees, or is it just my...
So it is, in fact, 2 trees. You got a very good eye. So I didn't even notice this until probably 2 years ago when I defoliated it after I had purchased it. I had defoliated it many times prior to that during my apprenticeship, but I defoliated a couple years ago, and one of the other apprentices at Fujikawa-san's garden was like, man, this back trunk back here has a lot tighter ramification than the rest of the tree. Actually, if you flip the tree around, you can see this whole section here is actually a separate tree that's been added onto the back here, but it's been grafted into the original one, so you can't really tell that it's a separate plant aside from the difference in ramification.
Well, and you can tell... What I saw was you have one big root coming up here from the trunk, and then you have a branch going down low, which also must be from a root, and that's very rare to happen in maple.
Exactly.
So it's like,
So
did they play around a little bit? So a solution, right? If you miss a back branch, just graft one in. Even the Japanese do it.
Exactly, yeah. And the tree could get away without having that there, but you would certainly lose a lot of depth.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that it's a part of the composition at this point.
Very nice tree. If it ever comes for sale and it goes to Europe, now these formal display areas in the house. I always mix tokonoma and tokonoma.
Right.
I don't know why, the city and the place, but you had this designed, and I know you've spent a lot of time because you have this video also on your website on designing one of these formal displays. What is the layout? What's the thinking behind this?
Yeah, so I designed this whole thing myself. Including like all of the gold and the side piece there, like all of it sort of came out of my head. But it's a combination of different elements that I enjoyed seeing from other gardens around mostly Kyoto. So traditional tokonoma is going to be much more squared off. This obviously has kind of a semicircle moon theme, if you will. The gold backdrop here is in fact gold leaf, but it was put on there to kind of mimic either the moon or the sun, depending on what time of day you're viewing it here. And having this kind of round facade on the front emphasizes that idea that this is moonlight or sunlight. Right? And then the base down here is actually a big piece of lacquerware. This took about 8 or 9 months for them to complete. It's not typical lacquer, which is normally black. This is actually what's called budo-iro, which is a purplish color. It means grape color in Japanese, but it's meant to be a little less heavy feeling than a solid black one because this is in fact a floating piece of lacquerware. Right, so it sits above the base underneath it there. So if it was black, it would feel just way too heavy. But we've got a flowering apricot on display here. It's almost ready to bloom. And I've got
flowers open in the back.
Yeah, just on the back side there. So I moved it in last night in hopes that I could get it to pop in time for our tour coming up this next week. I'll have to move it back.
Which will happen.
Which will happen, I think, and then we've got a really cool little kuzuya stone off to the side, kind of a hut stone. No real reason why I chose that one. It's just a good size for this composition here.
Is there any reason why this is a rough beam rather than a stout beam?
Yeah, so this is what's called a shibori maruta in Japanese. It means like a squeezed pole, basically. So it's a piece of cryptomeria that's been dried out in a very specific way, leaving these natural ridges on it. They also make these where they'll put, it's a really weird process, they'll put almost like squiggly looking bamboo chopsticks, or plastic chopsticks rather, all over the trunks of these in nature, cover them with wire, they then grow into it and it creates these ridges. But this is a natural one that's dried out through a different kind of process. So they say for every 100 trunks of cryptomeria, only one of them will turn out this way. So these are relatively hard to come by, but it's I think a really nice sort of semi-formal part of the tokonoma here. This is kind of a mix of elements. We got semi-formal, very formal elements here, and informal with the naguri base underneath here. So it's a bit of a strange tokonoma in that regard. It doesn't follow any one format, but I like all of the elements in combination here.
But it's a nice and welcoming entrance to your place.
Definitely. Yeah.
And this is also the entrance to your private residence, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So we have the workshop, and then next to that, the private residence, and around it, the garden.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice. And I like that you've got Prunusmumi. It's I've been telling my wife I need to get one at home in the garden itself, because in Europe you don't see them all that much. But here you walk around on the streets and every single garden you see Prunusmumi.
They're everywhere.
Flowering in February. It's just amazing. I would love to have a very quick look at your workshop.
We can absolutely.
And then we will leave you again because the next tour group is coming, I think.
Yeah, no problem.
Now this is a workshop, but I'm missing a workbench.
So
how do you work here?
Well, so I've got my turntables all crammed in the corner to the back here. They're covered with stuff at the moment. But yeah, normally we have at least one or two of those out in the space here working on trees. But since we got so many groups coming through this week, we figured we'd put everything away for the time being.
Professional photo setup for your trees, that you can do your video and your tree shots. Do you use photography also to look at your trees, or do you have a good feel for the tree meanwhile?
Usually I have a decent feel for it. We do have a black backdrop that I can pull down here, and I will usually put the trees up against there, even if I'm not filming or photographing them, because it really gives you a nice kind of clean look. So you can kind of see some of the details in there and change a few things. But yeah, normally I have kind of a vision of what I want to do with a tree from the get-go, and don't really need to necessarily take a picture, although sometimes that can be very helpful for sure.
And nice burnt ceiling.
Yeah, this is yakisugi, or shosugiban in Japanese. It's burnt cedar. It's a technique that was used in the past to make the wood more flame retardant.
Yep.
There's a lot of buildings in Kyoto and around Japan would burn down pretty regularly. So this was kind of one of those backstops against that.
And against moisture, right? It's a preservative
And against moisture as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the walls in here are covered in kind of a traditional Japanese stucco type material that has grass embedded in it. It's called wara.
Okay.
It's just meant to provide kind of a calming feeling in here, and it also absorbs some sound, which makes it a little easier to record in here too.
But I like the, how do you call it, almost minimalist styling of this workspace, where we would have really workbenches and drawers and everything, just one case, few rolls, and the green tea.
Yeah, we get the green tea here. So surprisingly,
typical Japanese workspace.
It is so hard to find really good turntables here in Japan that are Japanese made. The tool companies here really don't have good options, so these were the best options. They've actually worked quite well for what we're doing here. So I've been impressed with them so far.
Excellent. This is such a nice place that you've built here.
Thank you.
Last house. Is this where you're going to grow old?
That's the plan, yeah.
So for the next 80 years, we'll come and visit you here in Japan.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good, or at least until I'm 80 years old, right? So the next 40 years, we'll say.
Well, you live in Japan now, so life expectancy 100, 110, so that's a long, happy life.
Yeah, diet's a little different here, so yeah.
So, thank you for having me here. It's a really, really great show here. Are you going to be in Kokufu?
I will be up at the Kokufu. I'm taking a couple of big groups up there this year. We've got 2 40-person groups back to back. So a lot of work coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Then I wish you lots of luck. And well, I'll see you at Kokufu. If you ever make it back to Germany, you're like, hey, I'm somewhere in the area of Düsseldorf, give me a shout. I'll pop by.
Excellent.
And well, thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
See you next time.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. That's not going to be it. Well, and there you have it. Bjorn, Eisei En, Kyoto, and the gardens visit. I do hope you enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video. This was Jelle, growing bonsai. See you next time.